On a summer afternoon in 1986, 25-year-old Susie Lampla left her West London real estate office for what should have been a routine house viewing. The young agent had an appointment in Fulham with a client known only as Mr. Kipper. Susie noted the name in her work diary and headed out around 12:40 p.m. on July 28, 1986, expecting to return shortly, but she never did. In broad daylight, in the midst of a professional errand, Susie Lampla vanished without a trace. Her disappearance would become one of Britain's most notorious unsolved cases, sparking a decades-long investigation, countless theories, and a lingering heartache for her family. When Susie didn't come back to the office that afternoon, concern quickly mounted. By evening, her white Ford Fiesta was found abandoned on a quiet street in Fulham, not far from the property she was due to show. The car's keys were missing, but puzzling clues remained. The car's doors were unlocked and Susie's purse lay inside. Witnesses later recalled seeing a woman they believed to be Susie arguing with a man outside the empty house she was showing around 1 p.m. Another witness reported a sighting of a man and woman resembling Susie struggling inside a dark BMW near that location. These accounts painted a frightening picture of a confrontation on the street. Police responding to the missing person report immediately feared an abduction. They launched a massive search effort that extended across the city and beyond, and in the following weeks, officers chased down every lead they could find. According to contemporary reports from that time, the investigation even stretched overseas with detectives pursuing tips as far away as the United States. Despite this extensive effort spanning 2 continents, no reliable evidence or sightings turned up. By the fall of 1987, after more than a year of fruitless searching, the active police inquiry was significantly scaled back. The file remained open, but with no strong leads, the investigation went cold. Susie Lampla's fate was a mystery, and it seemed her abductor, potentially this Mr. Kipper, had vanished as completely as she had. In the initial phase, speculation about what happened to Susie ran rampant. Could she have arranged her own disappearance? Had she been targeted by someone she knew, or fallen prey to a random attacker? Those who knew Susie rejected the idea that she would voluntarily vanish. She had a full life she was happy with, and she left behind her belongings and car in a way that suggested duress. The circumstances strongly indicated foul play. Investigators looked into Susie's personal life and contacts, but found no obvious suspects beyond the mysterious Mr. Kipper. A composite sketch of a man seen with her that day was circulated, showing a well-dressed, dark-haired man in his 20s or 30s. But no one came forward to identify that person, and leads were sparse. By late 1987, the Metropolitan Police had to admit they were stumped. Susie's parents, Paul and Diana Lampla, kept her case in the public eye, appealing for information and even hiring private investigators. Yet months turned into years without answers. However, in 1989, a grim new possibility emerged that would reshape the investigation. That year, a 35-year-old man named John Cannon was convicted for a string of violent crimes. These crimes included multiple essay offenses, multiple abductions and abduction attempts, as well as the slaying of a young woman named Shirley Banks in 1987. Cannon was a suave, well-spoken former car salesman with a disarming personality, despite his history of extreme violence. Crucially, it was learned that he had been released from prison just days before Susie vanished in July 1986. Even more chilling, witnesses thought Cannon bore a strong resemblance to the composite sketch of the man thought to be Mr. Kipper. When police interviewed Cannon's former girlfriend, she expressed suspicions that he might have been involved in Susie's case, further heightening suspicion. Contemporary investigators interviewed Cannon in prison at least 3 times starting in 1989, hoping he might shed light on Susie's fate. Despite these attempts, Cannon denied having anything to do with the case. At that time, detectives found no hard evidence linking him to Susie's disappearance, and he wasn't charged. Still, the parallels were hard to ignore, and they were about to get weirder. His nickname in prison, it turned out, was Kipper. A bizarre coincidence, if indeed it was one. But that's not where it stops. When Cannon was arrested for the slaying of Shirley Banks, the authorities discovered he owned a vehicle with false plates. The false plates read SLP 386S, with some believing that SLP stood for Susie's name, while 86 stood for the year she disappeared. The media began loudly speculating that Cannon could very well be the mystery client who lured Susie to her doom. In 1993, 7 years after she went missing, authorities officially declared Susie Lamplugh dead in absentia, acknowledging what everyone feared. For her family, this legal declaration was another painful milestone, coming with no comfort of knowing what truly happened. Hopes were raised briefly in 1994 when a different convicted perpetrator, Michael Sams, claimed from prison that he was responsible. Sams was serving life for the slaying of a woman and the kidnapping of a real estate agent in a separate case, and he reached out claiming responsibility for Susie's disappearance. However, police quickly dismissed his story as implausible, and Susie's relatives condemned it as a cruel hoax. The authorities came to the conclusion that Sams appeared to have fabricated the confession for attention, and that there was no evidence he was involved. He simply realized that the case fit his modus operandi and was able to gain the spotlight in that way. In 1999, after years of inactivity on the case, Susie's mother, Diana Lamplugh, received an unexpected tip. An anonymous informant told her that Susie's remains might be buried at an old army barracks at Norton in Worcestershire. This lead was startling. It was far from London, and it's unclear how credible it was, but Diana passed it to the police. In the year 2000, with some new information at hand, the Metropolitan Police decided to formally reopen the investigation. Officers conducted digs and searches at the old barracks site and other locations suggested over the years. These searches sadly yielded nothing of significance, and it remains unclear if the report was a hoax or not. Nonetheless, the renewed investigation began to re-examine all the evidence and witness statements with fresh eyes, utilizing advances in forensic science and criminal profiling. The cold case team's work led them back to the suspect who had long lingered in the background, and the spotlight would now once again shine on John Cannon. By 2002, the accumulated evidence, though circumstantial, was compelling enough that the Metropolitan Police took an extraordinary step. They publicly named John Cannon as the prime, and indeed only, suspect in Susie Lamplugh's abduction and presumed slaying. This announcement was highly unusual, as suspects in the UK are seldom named without charges. The Crown Prosecution Service, essentially the British equivalent of the District Attorney, announced there was still insufficient evidence to actually charge Cannon and bring him to trial. No body had been found, and the case remained built on inference and testimony rather than direct proof. John Cannon, for his part, consistently denied involvement. He was already serving a life sentence in prison for his other crimes, yet he emphatically told police and the media that he had nothing to do with Susie's case. Cannon even expressed through his lawyer that he encouraged any new searches, claiming he hoped a thorough investigation would clear his name once and for all. Despite his claims of innocence, few investigating officers or people in the public ever believed him, instead viewing this as a way to drag out the cruelty inflicted. The officers viewed Cannon as a manipulative and dangerous man who simply wouldn't confess. That said, Even these detectives had to admit that it was possible that John Cannon didn't actually do it. Rather, he may have used his manipulative nature to draw attention in the opposite way that Michael Sams did. While Sams was able to capture brief attention through telling a bold lie that could be easily disproven, Cannon may have been much more cunning. By keeping the air of mystery surrounding himself, he invited substantially more attention from the media, whether he committed the crime or not. Further, if he didn't do it, he may have derived some sick satisfaction from knowing he had essentially claimed another victim to his name without lifting a finger. And as you'll see, the investigation didn't stop with Cannon. Even after naming Cannon as their chief suspect in 2002, the Metropolitan Police didn't close the case. In 2008, there was a brief exploration of another theory. Steve Wright, a serial perpetrator convicted that year of slaying 5 women in Suffolk, was scrutinized to see if he might have any connection to Susie's disappearance. Wright had lived in London in the 1980s, and the timing prompted speculation. However, after reviewing Wright's history, detectives found that there was no likely connection, despite the fact he couldn't be fully ruled out. Fresh information has been rare, but not entirely absent. In 2010, a witness came forward with a recollection that back in 1986, he had noticed a disturbed patch of earth on a small piece of scrubland in West London. He feared it could have been a hastily dug grave, but for reasons unknown, he waited almost 25 years to report it. Acting on this tip, police conducted a new search of the area decades later. Officers combed the site with forensic teams, but if something had once been buried there, it was long gone or unrelated. Some have naturally questioned whether this witness was part of yet another cruel hoax. The most dramatic efforts to find Susie in recent years have focused again on that prime suspect. In October 2018, over 32 years after Susie vanished, police descended on a suburban house near Birmingham. It was the former home of John Cannon's mother. Acting on what Scotland Yard called new information, investigators tore up the garden and even dismantled a garage on the property looking for Susie's remains. For 2 weeks, specialized teams, including forensic archaeologists and ground-penetrating radar units, meticulously excavated the site. But when the dig concluded, a Metropolitan Police spokesperson announced that no evidence was recovered. Unsurprisingly, Cannon's lawyer at the time reiterated that his client maintained his innocence, saying Cannon hoped the failed search would put to rest the suspicions hanging over him. In July 2019, investigators tried once more, this time targeting a different location, a tract of land in Pershore, Worcestershire. This area wasn't chosen at random. Pershore isn't far from Norton Barracks, the site the family was tipped off 2 years before. With the help of archaeologists, the authorities combed through earth and rubble in search of any trace of Susie, but again, nothing was found. And that same summer, another intriguing piece of information surfaced. A witness reported seeing a man dumping a heavy suitcase into London's Grand Union Canal on the very day Susie disappeared in 1986. Again, it's unclear why this witness waited over 3 decades to come forward with this information. The canal in question had been dredged and searched years earlier in several unrelated cases, and it seemed unlikely something would be recovered so long after. John Cannon remained the prime suspect until the end of his life. In 2023, after serving 35 years behind bars, he came up for a parole review. The parole board, hearing of his continued insistence on innocence and lack of remorse for even his confirmed crimes, refused to release him. Then, in November 2024, Cannon died of natural causes in prison at the age of 70. If indeed Cannon was responsible, He carried the secret of Susie's final resting place to his grave. Despite years of pressure, he never gave any indication of where Susie's body might be, and always maintained his innocence in relation to her case. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here, just quickly reminding you to hit that like button and share this video with your friends and family. Also, be sure to check out my alternative channel, Lazy Chill True Crime, for more content specifically related to solved true crime cases. Imagine a vast island appearing on old maps, only to vanish when explorers went to find it. New South Greenland was one such phantom island, a phantom landmass that captured imaginations in the 19th century. Its story is a fascinating tale of exploration, error, and the enduring allure of the unknown. A phantom island is essentially a geographic mirage, an island once reported and charted, but later proven not to exist. These are, in essence, the ghost stories of cartography. Many arose during the Age of Sail, when explorers with primitive navigation tools miscalculated positions or were fooled by illusions at sea. Fog banks, floating ice, or tricks of light could make open ocean look like distant land. Eager sailors announced new discoveries, and map makers dutifully added them to their charts. Some phantom islands persisted for years or even centuries before being quote-unquote undiscovered. The tale of New South Greenland begins in March 1823 in the icy seas off Antarctica. American Captain Benjamin Morrell was commanding the schooner Wasp on a sealing voyage. They were exploring the virtually uncharted Weddell Sea when his crew sighted something that looked like a coastline to the west. Elated, Morrell steered toward this apparent shore and followed it for several days, mapping as he went. By his estimate, the Wasp traced over 300 miles of continuous coastline. The shores were visible with high mountains beyond. The island was teeming with life, including flocks of seabirds and thousands of seals, convincing Morrell that a substantial new land lay before him. Believing he had encountered a new extension of Antarctica, or perhaps a large island, Morrell named the supposed land New South Greenland. He carefully recorded coordinates for its capes and bays, then turned north as winter ice closed in. It's important to note this winter ice element, since the Wasp never directly made landfall on the island due to safety reasons. Back in port, Morrell published his account of this discovery, sparking a stir in geographic circles. If true, he had found a huge unknown land at the bottom of the world. Some maps even began depicting a vague coastline or a blank space labeled New South Greenland in that region. Not everyone accepted Morrell's claim. The captain already had a reputation for either exaggeration or a lack of competence, or both, depending on the source. Simply put, he wasn't the most reliable witness to begin with, but his crew had also witnessed the supposed new land as well, bolstering his claim substantially. In 1838, French explorer Jules Dumont d'Urville sailed to the coordinates of New South Greenland's supposed northern cape to check for himself. He found nothing but empty ocean and drifting ice where the coast should have been. This stark failure bolstered skeptics' belief that Morrell's land was a mistake, perhaps a mirage of distant ice or a navigational error. Morrell might have been off course, or maybe he saw an illusion that looked like solid ground. Yet the phantom refused to fade away, and in 1843, the respected British explorer Sir James Clark Ross reported sighting a hazy appearance of land in the same general area of the Weddell Sea. In the view of many contemporaries, this took the claim from an unreliable sighting by a captain with a shoddy reputation to just short of established geographic fact. Ross couldn't get closer due to heavy pack ice, but his glimpse of a distant misty mountain on the horizon kept the mystery alive a while longer. For the rest of the 19th century, the Weddell Sea remained a blank space, its phantom islands unverified. The final verdict on New South Greenland came with the dawn of the 20th century, when Antarctic expeditions at last probed this remote region. In 1912, Wilhelm Filchner led a German voyage into the Weddell Sea, specifically to hunt for the rumored land. By chance, Filchner's ship, the Deutschland, became trapped in pack ice and drifted near Morell's reported coordinates. Seizing the opportunity, Filchner's team journeyed over the ice in search of any shoreline. They saw none, only unbroken white sea ice in every direction. To be sure, they drilled through the ice and measured the ocean depth below. The water proved to be thousands of feet deep, far too deep for any landmass. Filchner concluded that New South Greenland had never existed, except perhaps as an optical illusion. However, due to the upcoming conflict that was about to engulf the world, this wasn't widely reported at the time. Further confirmation came in 1915 from Sir Ernest Shackleton during his Endurance expedition. Also stuck in the Weddell Sea ice, Shackleton's crew witnessed the same mirage-like phenomenon. They witnessed distant, towering shapes that looked like land, which then eventually faded away. They were seeing a polar mirage known as a fata morgana, which bends light to conjure phantom islands on the horizon. Soundings again found only deep ocean where land was supposed to be. Shackleton concluded that Morell's version of Greenland was nothing more than ice and vapor, effectively ending this mystery that once haunted the Southern Ocean. In the dense, swampy rainforests of the Congo Basin, stories persist of a creature that shouldn't exist in our modern world. Known to locals as the Mokele Mbembe, meaning one who stops the flow of rivers, this dinosaur-like beast has captured the imagination of locals and Westerners for generations. But what exactly is the Mokele Mbembe, and what might explain the numerous sightings reported throughout history? According to local accounts from indigenous peoples of the Congo Basin, the Mokele Mbembe is described as a large, water-dwelling animal with a long neck, small head, and lengthy tail. It's said to be approximately the size of an elephant with a brownish-gray coloration, and is reported to be herbivorous, feeding on plants that grow near riverbanks. What makes this creature particularly intriguing is how closely its description resembles that of a sauropod dinosaur. For those unfamiliar with the term, think of a brontosaurus. They're huge and they have long necks. The oral history of the indigenous peoples of the Congo Basin suggests that the creature has been seen and known for millennia. The first documented Western encounter with stories of the Mokele Mbembe dates back to 1776. French missionaries reported hearing tales of a large animal that left behind enormous rounded footprints, though this was interpreted by contemporaries as a reference to elephants. The modern Western fascination with this cryptid truly began in the early 20th century, when explorers and colonial officials started bringing these stories to wider attention. In 1909, Paul Gratz, a German explorer, chronicled indigenous accounts of a dinosaur-like creature in what is now Zambia, referring to it as the Nasanga. Gratz reported that this supposed dinosaur creature looked like a sauropod, though he didn't report seeing one himself. Around the same time, Carl Hagenbeck, a famous animal collector who supplied animals to conventional zoos, as well as the likes of P.T. Barnum, released his autobiography. In his memoirs, he mentioned that he heard reports from multiple sources about a creature which he could only describe as half elephant and half dragon. In 1913, a German captain named Freiherr von Stein documented detailed indigenous descriptions of the creature during an expedition to the area. His report described the animal as having a long, flexible neck, a large body, and a lengthy tail like a lizard, again fitting the Brontosaurus phenotype. Some sources claim that the Smithsonian sponsored an expedition from 1919 to 1920, partly to investigate the reports of the creature. Digging through the historical records, the main purpose of the trip was to study the then largely undocumented lowland gorilla. Nevertheless, what is true is that the expedition did occur, and the scientists encountered large footprints which couldn't be readily explained. The Mokele Mbembe received a massive boost in attention when Roy Mikel, a University of Chicago biology professor, began to research the creature in the 1980s. Mikel had become famous for being an academically legitimate biologist who had studied the Loch Ness Monster in the 1970s. While most mainstream academics wouldn't touch cryptids with a 10-foot pole, Mikel instead decided to dive down the rabbit hole. He undertook 2 significant expeditions to the region to definitively prove that the creature exists, or find an alternative satisfactory explanation. Ultimately, the team were able to collect further eyewitness accounts, but weren't able to gather any hard evidence on the elusive cryptid. Despite numerous expeditions over the decades, conclusive evidence for the Mokele Mbembe remains absent. No specimens, bones, clear photographs, or indisputable tracks have been scientifically documented. That said, when evaluating this lack of direct evidence, it's important to consider the regions where the Mokele Mbembe is reported to live. These are some of the most remote and least explored areas on Earth. The Congo Basin contains vast swamps and waterways that remain largely untouched by modern development, which mainstream biologists believe potentially harbor undiscovered species. While the idea of a living dinosaur is undeniably fascinating, several more plausible explanations exist for the Mokele Mbembe phenomenon. The most straightforward explanation is that witnesses are encountering known animals, but misinterpreting what they're seeing. The most likely candidate, according to biologists, are forest elephants. When swimming with only their backs and trunks visible above water, these animals could resemble the description of the Mokele Mbembe, particularly from a distance. It's notable to mention that forest elephants are extremely reclusive and aren't an animal that would be routinely seen by locals. A forest elephant sighting could very well be a once-in-a-lifetime incident. Another likely candidate is the hippo, which could be responsible for large footprints, or for the river blocking attributed to the cryptid. That said, personally I view this as less likely, given that the hippo doesn't have a trunk that could be interpreted as a neck from a distance. Others have suggested a number of other less viable candidates, such as Nile crocodiles and large pythons. All that said, I think the most interesting theory is that the creature is a cultural time capsule. The descriptions of the Mokele Mbembe may represent traditional ecological knowledge, information passed down through generations about animals that once existed in the region. It's possible that oral traditions preserved memories of locally or generally extinct megafauna from thousands of years ago, gradually transforming into the current legends. Under this theory, think of the oral tradition as a long-running intergenerational game of telephone. One village elder thousands of years ago tells the next about a huge river-blocking animal he once saw. The listener then repeats the story to her children, trimming boring parts and adding bits she remembers, or thinks she remembers. Centuries later, the core stays the same, but necks get longer, tails thicker, and footprints larger. The final tale may look like a dinosaur, yet its seed could have been an encounter with a long-extinct animal, or with the once more plentiful forest elephants. Tracking those storytelling shifts could help biologists uncover what animals really roamed the Congo long ago.